is our second interview with Nai Damato. No, it was one big video, but this video really was big, and I decided to make two videos, download two videos to YouTube, part 1 and part 2. What I want to say about part 2, it could be triggered to some people because it would be most about child abuse, child gaslighting, child neglect, and violence toward disabled kids. So if you're triggered because of ableism and ageism, hey, you just couldn't watch it. So Nai is part of a multiple system. Nai is a blind person. Nai live in blind body and an autistic body. Also, Nai is a child trauma survivor, and Nai is a queer person. I would give a link to my first video, our first video with Nai, and another stuff that I want to say about this video. Nai don't want to be seen, so it would be more like a podcast, not a video, fully video.
I mean, like a few days ago, we came across a commercial about Jessica Long, the Paralympian, and it just so happens that she and I are from the same orphanage. So when we watched the documentary, we were exposed to footage of our own orphanage, and so like that would be an example of where it was really hard not to have these like really vulnerable alters coming in front, and we had to work really hard to like stay present and not get totally lost in that early childhood trauma memory, you know.
Yeah, I have stuff like this. I think months ago when my soul teacher write to me about school when we were learning when we were kids about our old address in Ukraine, Donetsk, and after
Mhm.
that I was in daydreaming kind of sort. I was daydreaming, but
Mhm.
after I read this mail, everything stopped, and
Mhm.
I started crying and crying, and I was I was going to the pharmacy. It was in the city center. I don't understand what's going on with me. I just can't stop crying because one of
Mhm.
our altars, one of our littles was triggered because it
Right.
was
I'm
about
sorry.
school. It was about our old address. Yeah.
Right. I'm sorry
I'm
to
sorry
hear
that
that.
all of this happened with you too, about all this
Yeah.
stuff. I think that it's awful, and I think that all this system with children now is deeply unjust. All this ageistic system.
Yeah.
But the way, what do you think? I don't write this question before, but what do you think? If in our world wasn't so many ableism and ageism, how your
Mhm.
experience would be different from what it was?
It
Because
definitely
yeah,
would have been very different because a lot of our trauma was caused by the combination of ableism and ageism. So, one example is that we were only discovered to be legally blind at body age 12. And one of the reasons that it took so long is because even though we complained about not being able to see, um, parents and teachers and other adults all just thought we were just, a stupid kid trying to get glasses who just thought it would be cool to have glasses or whatever. They didn't believe us. And that's a very common part of ageism is people will think that kids are just liars or, are just faking for attention or whatever. So because of that, it took until we were 12 and switched schools and failed the vision screening for them to realize that we had been legally blind the whole time. And so a lot of trauma happened because we were punished for things like not making eye contact or not being able to write neatly enough. And so that's the ableism piece. And so we were literally like severely abused for basically being a disabled child who couldn't meet able-bodied standards and who wasn't relieved because of being a child. So that so ableism and ageism have been huge factors in a lot of our trauma history.
Yeah, I'm so sorry to hear all the stuff about glasses and your vision. It was when you was living in USA or early?
In the US, so that was with her adoptive family after being adopted, and so um that's the thing. The orphanage, they either hid it or they didn't know. And then, our parents didn't want to believe that we had eye problems. And then the eye doctors didn't actually think to do a thorough exam because her parents went in there saying, like, oh, I think that Nai just wants glasses. They literally just didn't do a full exam that would have revealed that we were legally blind until we switched schools and another adult was like, "Oh, this kid failed the vision screening." Um, and so it took another adult noticing our vision problems for them to finally take it seriously and for the eye doctor to finally actually do a full exam that showed that we were legally blind the whole time.
Yeah, it's so weird that family like this could adopt kids. Yeah.
Right. Like what is there to lose in just doing the full test and if I wasn't having vision problems, the test would have said that, and then if I was, it would have caught it earlier. But that's sort of what ageism and ableism do is
Yeah.
people will believe the word of an adult so strongly over that of a child to the point of they won't even bother to check for physical evidence that the child could actually be saying the truth.
Yeah. And what do you think that could change all the situation with ageism in our society?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is just start believing children. And I know that, sometimes kids will be like, I have a tummy ache because they want to get out of a test or something. So, like, sure, that happens. And so I understand where some of that comes from. But if a child is consistently complaining about symptoms over many years, especially like I was, then that needs to be taken seriously. If a child is consistently saying they can't see or whatever, then that needs to be really investigated and not just dismissed. And so the first thing I would do is I would say adults need to come to the table and really trust that kids are generally honest and gonna be saying the truth. And sure, there might be times here or there where they lie about going to a party or whatever, but that doesn't make them liars through to their core necessarily. That's And I would also just say that we have to respect children as full humans and full people who have feelings, who have legitimate experiences. Their feelings are valid. That's sort of the other part of ageism. It'll be like, oh, you can't have real problems because you're too young. Oh, you can't have real pain because you're too young to have physical pain and things like that. But children can and do go through those experiences sometimes. And so, again, it's just adults taking those complaints seriously, especially if they're consistent and not just like a one-time thing. Look at the context and give kids the benefit of the doubt. And I think that's the main thing that could change. And that's the thing is when we went back to work in schools as a teacher, we saw that continue. We would see the teachers just sort of like blow off the kids and be like, oh, you don't have a headache. You're just trying to get out of this or whatever. And it was just like, why wouldn't you just believe that they have a headache and just say, I'm sorry you have a headache, but unfortunately you still have to do the class assignment anyway. Like, it doesn't have to be this battle of like always thinking that children are just out to like lie to adults or whatever. And if kids lie, then just look at the context. Like, okay, the kid wanted to go to a party and get away with going to a party, but that doesn't mean that they're gonna lie about something like stomach pain or whatever.
Yeah, and anyway, adults lie too, especially when they don't have privilege and need
Right.
to do like
That's
other
the thing is it's
stuff.
like so automatic. People don't even think about it.
Yeah,
You
and
know.
some of our littles just stuck in this ageism system. They think that
Mhm.
no one would believe them. It's sometimes
Yeah.
the biggest problem because I couldn't just explain them that everything's fine because they think that no one believed them and everyone lied.
Right. And that was sort of our child insiders are still very in that mindset too because they were never believed about any by any adults in our life. And so another example is we have a genetic joint disorder where our joints come out of socket and it's excruciatingly painful. And so as when our body was child age, we would complain about joint pain, but people would say like, "Oh, you can't have joint pain. You're too young for that." Like, "Oh no, that's for old people." Or they'd say like, "Oh, it's just a little growing pains. It's nothing serious." But they never thought to like actually look deeper and say maybe something else is going on here. Um, they just sort of blew it off because again, children just make stuff up for attention, right?
Yeah, the stuff about attention in Russian culture, it's so you need to be like everyone else, and it's very bad if you want more attention. But everyone believes that teens want to gain attention, and I
Mhm.
don't want to gain any attention. I want just to be a good girl. This time, when I was teen, I tried to be a girl. I
Mhm.
don't accept that I'm the transgender, but I just couldn't be a normal good girl. I just tried to fit in, but I couldn't because I was so different. But most of all, I wanted just to fit in. So it was so weird when everyone said that I tried to gain attention.
Right. And that's the other thing is like people when we said we knew we weren't straight when we came out as queer and things like that, they're oh, that's just a phase. It's like, well, now our body's 31 and we're still queer, so well, it wasn't a phase. It's just this whole mentality that like anything children and young people go through is fake and not real and not legitimate and they can't possibly know anything about themselves and so on and so forth when of course they're exploring their identities and learning who they are and all of that, but that doesn't mean that you just like dismiss everything they say.
Yeah. One of our first split, I think, was because one of our little because I and Mowgli, one of our littles, the one our parents tried to push us to be a girl, and he just can't couldn't became a girl, and we were split. And after that, I started hearing his voices in my head, but I tried to be a good girl, and yeah, it was
Right.
the beginning of why we became a sister. I don't know when maybe it was postulate, like because of it we started to develop like a system. Maybe one of the first ones.
Yeah.
It the first that I clearly remember.
And multiplicity makes us like with multiplicity, knowing that about ourselves in retrospect, we can understand how it was confusing for people because sometimes we would say we felt male, sometimes we'd say we felt female, sometimes we would say we felt non-binary. So our gender identity was always changing, and now that we're multiple, we realize it was different alters coming in front who had different gender identities. And so we understand that's like a rare thing that most of the adults in our life couldn't have possibly thought of. So from their perspective, they're just thinking like, oh, Nai can't make up their mind. They don't know what they are. Um, but at the same time, like, why not just let kids
Yeah.
explore and then be like, maybe you think you're a boy right now, and then later you'll realize you aren't. And like, okay, so that's all that has to be. Like, everybody goes through that. There's people who will be like, they'll be Jewish and then they'll decide to convert to Christianity. Like, people's identities evolve and change, and that doesn't mean that they weren't being authentic during the time that they identified a certain way, you know.
Yeah. And what if you could change society? What you would do with this power dynamic when adults have all privilege and have so many rights over kids? This system in I don't know a system of adoption and system of parenting, and it doesn't matter adoptive parents or orphanages or biological parents. They have such so much power that I think
Right.
no one in ideal world would have.
So the first thing I would change, start with adoption and then I'll get more broad. And let me just say that in addition to being adopted, um, I volunteer interpreted for them. So I saw many adoptions happening, not just my own. And I also have quite a few friends who are adopted. So I have this sort of big picture on adoption that a lot of people don't, because I've seen hundreds of them. The thing with adoption is there's three parties that are involved. There's the adopted child, the adoptive parent or parents, and then the birth parents. So there's the adoptee, the adoptive family, and then the birth family. In the adoption process, 99% of the power goes to the adoptive family. The adoptive family chooses the adoptive child. The adoptive family gets the rights over the child that the birth parents lose. And so the first thing I would say is there needs to be more effort to balance the power between those three groups. The birth parents should have more say, and the adoptive child should also have more say, especially when they're an older child. I know, obviously, like, a very young child can't necessarily make those choices, but it's just the whole idea that it's a choice that the adopted parents made that the adoptee didn't necessarily make that creates a power dynamic. Some of this is kind of hard to solve because we can't ignore the truth that, children are developing, their brains are developing. There is that part of it. They can't make judgments the way an adult can because their brains are developing. So, you know, some people make the argument like, well, a child can't sign a lease or whatever. And it's like, I totally get that. But I think what we should do is give children as much say as they can possibly handle neurologically. And so that might not look like signing a lease, but that might look like talking to the child and seeing if they connected with the adopted parents too, rather than it just being a one sided, the adoptive parents pick the child. See if the child also seemed to connect with the parents, or in a medical situation, like I was 13 when I got an eye surgery and I had no say in the eye surgery whatsoever. But I was old enough to have an opinion. So while I might not have made the final decision, it would have been nice if my doctors and my parents talked to me and included me in the decision before they exercised their legal rights as adults to say, like, how do you feel about this? So, again, adjusting to the age of the child. Of course, when somebody's 2, they can't really make much choice, but especially as you get closer to 18, you can give children more and more of a say in their decisions gradually as their brains develop enough to be able to handle them. I see that a lot working with blind children. It's like they're given no decision ability until 18, and then all of a sudden they're supposed to just make all their decisions by themselves. I think there needs to be a gradual increase in giving children more and more responsibility as they can handle it, and then that way it's a nice transition into adulthood, and it's not just this, like, stark contrast from, like, you have no say in your life to all of a sudden you're supposed to just be able to make all these decisions.
Yeah, and all these studies about brain developing, it's in many ways it's more social stuff how we teach children, because all studies about I don't know, women brain development or about Black people development was based on racism and sexism. And so I think many scientists based their conclusion of the of this studies of child brain, they based it on the ageism. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing is, there is a truth there with children that isn't true with other groups. Like,
2 years old
a 2-year-old brain is not developed to go out and drive a car. Like, so I'm not trying to argue, like, give people driver's license at any age or whatever. But you can start to gradually increase the level of responsibility and decision-making power you give somebody as they develop. You can give them the most autonomy possible. And that's where I see a lot of ageism, is I see way more autonomy taken away than is necessary. Like, I'll see kids be given no say in whatsoever in what they wear, like school uniforms. But a 15-year-old is smart enough to have feelings and opinions about what they wear. And, maybe the school or whatever will have some rules like, okay, you can't be naked or whatever, but they could still allow more freedom than they currently do. And that's where I see ageism
Yeah.
is it takes away more freedom than is necessary considering the child's level of brain development.
Yeah, and I think in adoption, a 5 years old kid could say that he or she or they don't like this person to be their new adopted parent. Yeah, it's
That's where I think like orphan directors and so on, they could look at the kids' body language and the way they're reacting to the parents. If they run out of the room and they're like have an intuitive scared feeling of the parents, then an adult there in the orphanage could be like, something doesn't seem right, and advocate, but so again, obviously, like a 5-year-old can't make an outright decision, but there could be another adult there who can advocate for what they're observing to see if there's a match from both sides and not just from the parent side.
Yeah, and I think it's better if people who work in social service or in orphanages understand autistic kid body language, because when I was a kid, most of the time adults just couldn't understand my emotion properly.
Right. And I mean, that's the other piece that ageism takes away from children. Children might not have the brain development for certain things, but one thing they definitely have is intuition. And a lot of times parents will not heed the intuition of children. Like a lot of times children will just automatically know when somebody's not um a good person or something. Not necessarily always, but it's just again like look in the context, right? I often had a good sense of when somebody wasn't safe or not. Because I had been abused so much, I sort of had a sixth sense for abusers. But when being a child, I was never really given that respect of being able to know something intuitively because I was just a child who didn't know anything. So if I reacted to an adult with a negative reaction because I was picking up on something about them that wasn't safe, that was just seen as like, oh, nah, you're being a brat, rather than like, my child's reacting to this adult for a reason. I mean, we understand that dogs and animals have an intuition, and a lot of times they'll bark at somebody who's not a good character. But then with children, a lot of times we'll ignore that. So it's just, again, giving children as much autonomy as we can possibly give them in the circumstance.
Yeah, and another question would be about what society could do with all this ableism, and what society could do to help people with several different disability, like you, for example, you're blind, you're autistic, and you're multiple. So, yeah.
Okay, so the first thing I'm going to say, and I know this is a less popular opinion, but disability is such a varied experience.
Yeah.
And I see two overwhelming narratives, and both of them don't quite fit me all the way. There's the social model of disability pride, and then there's the medical model of disability is like an impairment and an illness, right?
Yeah.
And I actually relate to both of them because I'm proud to be blind, I'm proud to be autistic, I'm proud to be multiple, but I would cure my chronic illnesses in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
And so some people want to cure because they're really suffering and they don't want to suffer, and that's not ableist. At the same time, a lot of people are proud of their experience, and it's not necessarily a lesser experience. You know, there's a lot of beauty in being deaf or blind or whatever. So I think both of those need to be respected. And to me, ableism is not just thinking that disability is lesser, it's also assuming that there's like a one narrative, a one story that fits for all disabled experiences. I often feel erased as a chronically ill person by the disability pride mentality that anybody who wants a cure is automatically ableist. Like, no, I don't want to suffer in pain anymore, and that's not ableist to want that disability to be cured, my joint issue. So I think the real anti-ableism is to just respect disabled people and their personal feelings about their personal situation, whatever that is. Some people are going to be proud, some people are going to want to cure, some people it's going to be kind of a mix of both. And everybody's experience of disability and their feelings about their disability is valid for them. The other thing that for me is anti-ableist is not taking your own feelings and putting it on somebody else. So, like, I'm proud to be blind, but a lot of the clients I work with hate their vision loss and they're very saddened by it and they don't want to be blind. For me, it's ableist to assume that blindness is lesser, but it's also ableist for me to assume that just because I'm proud to be blind, that somebody else has to be. So I think ultimately the best form of anti-ableism is to just respect each disabled person's experience of their disability or disabilities and to just honor that and also accept that we're going to have different experiences because disability is such a huge umbrella of experiences. I mean, a lot of the symptoms I suffer with is such a different experience from being proud to be autistic. Like it's almost weird that those are both considered disability and they fall under the same umbrella because there's such different experiences for me. I just hope that there's more acceptance for what I call hybrid model, that there's truth to both the medical, there's truth to both the social, and neither one is right or wrong. It's just a matter of what each disabled person resonates with.
Yeah, I have an experience like this with obsessive compulsive disorder that I really hate, and at the same time, I like to be autistic and multiple, so I understand what you're talking about.
Right. And that multiplicity is a good example of where I kind of feel a bit of both. There's certain parts of multiplicity that we love and cherish, and then there's other parts of multiplicity that are genuinely hard to live with, you know? So it's kind of both at the same time. I can't really put it in either model of social or medical. There's parts of both from my experience of multiplicity.
Yeah, and I think there's some kind of even with autism that I really don't want to be a neurotypical analyst, but if scientists would spend more time not try to make autistic kids be like their peers and play with toys, but we try to find something from to make sensory overloads better. It would be really cool, and I want this to do from sensory overload, for example.
Yeah, the approach I would love to see is help people heal the parts of a disability that aren't pleasant. So, like, I would love things that help with my sensory sensitivity,
Yeah.
but then celebrate the parts of disability that people enjoy and are proud of, like sign languages or, you know, the parts of autism that are beautiful, you know. So that's sort of my perspective on that.
Yeah, and I think in the better world, maybe even neurotypical people want to change something. For example, I noticed that many neurotypical more culturally, more depend of the culture of socialization that many autistic people, and maybe some of them decided to change it if they could do it. So
yeah, and that too, like two autistic people are going to have different feelings about their autism, and neither of them are right or wrong, as long as they don't expect other people to feel the same way.
yeah.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's need to say that because our society is deeply anti-autistic, I think it's well to speak about some positive stuff about autism or that society problem, but not our kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, I do think a lot of work needs to be done there. There is a lot of positive about autism. Society only sees the negatives. And also, a lot of it is like, why do we have to be normal or neurotypical? You know, like if I want to flap my hands because I'm happy or I'm nervous, who am I hurting? Like, why does that have to be stopped? Like, my family would, if I like flapped my hands, they would like push my arms down. And it's like, well, who was I hurting? You know, it's one thing if my stim is hurting myself or others, and maybe there needs to be ways to modify it to be safer. You know, like if I'm banging my head against a wall, it makes sense to think of how can we help you express your emotions in a way that's not going to injure your head and help that autistic person redirect to safer ways that isn't at the same time isn't forcing them to act neurotypical. But it's another thing when we're doing autistic things that aren't hurting anybody. Like, so what if I'm flapping my hands? So what if I'm rocking back and forth? That's what my brain needs to do. And that helps me think and it helps me process my emotions, and it's not a bad thing. And neurotypical people should learn how to be more comfortable with different ways of being. A lot of the social rules that neurotypicals come up with are pointless. Some of them make sense, but a lot of them, like, why do I have to sit still? You know?
Many of them, I think, not good even for neurotypical people. So they just repeat it because it's something that's considered polite, but it could be, I don't know, some of these norms was okay in the past, but after that considered, for example, sexist or something like this.
Right.
Some of them toxic. But
yeah,
yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, like there's some rules that to me make sense, like respecting people's boundaries. Like I don't want to be I don't want somebody to be in my space who I don't know well, or like if I'm saying something is private. That's a social rule that makes sense. But then there's other social rules that to me just don't make sense, like why do we have to take our hat off indoors or whatever? Like what's the point?
Yeah. And this change in different cultures, and in different cultures, if this kid, I don't know, don't look in the eyes. In some culture, it would be this kid is very polite. In other culture, it would be this kid is ill. So it does
Right.
don't have any sense.
Right.
Yeah. And I think last questions would be about what you want to say maybe to a new generation of autistic kids, and to a new generation of multiple people, and to blind people. So
Okay. I think what I would say is, you know, be comfortable being who you are. You can be proud to be autistic or blind or multiple, or if you don't like it, that's okay too. Just be who you are, and you don't have to feel sorry for being who you are. Um, and you're not wrong for being different. You're just who you are. And so never apologize or feel bad for being who you are.
Yeah, and the last question, I think, do you believe that society became better to autistic people, to multiple people, to blind people, or not? Do you have
I
to?
have seen
Yeah.
I've seen society get better with blindness. There's a little bit better. A little bit, but not much. It's still very hard for us to convince people that we're, you know, humans like that. People will ask questions like, "Can blind people fall in love?" And it's like, my
Oh,
my vision doesn't work, but I'm still a human. Like I still feel love. Um, so there's a lot of ways to go. Same with autism. There's sort of that assumption that we don't have the same human experiences of like love and connection or whatever. And with multiplicity, I think that's the one that needs the most work. A lot of people think that multiples are evil and violent. Autistics too, but also especially multiples. They think that we're evil and violent and they're dangerous and so on. And it's like, no, I'm multiple because I was victimized by those things. What made me multiple was surviving extreme violence. Other
yeah.
people being violent to me is why I'm multiple, like severe ongoing violence. So, no, I'm not going to turn around and do to you the things that were done to me that caused me immeasurable pain. I'm the most nonviolent person you could ever meet because I know just how much violence hurts. I know it gets a little more complicated. There are some systems who will have alters that act out and so on and so forth, including being violent. Some alters do learn how to be abusive and so on, but that's not any different from singlets. There's a lot of non multiple singlet people who are abused who then learn how to become abusive or what have you. So I would say, like, that's probably the most damaging is the idea that multiples are violent, and also the idea that we're so broken that we can't possibly contribute anything good to the world. I mean, like, I don't, I'm not openly multiple in most areas of my life. If I go get a coffee or whatever, um, it's not like that person knows I'm multiple. People at work don't know I'm multiple. But if they found out, would they immediately be like, well, how can you possibly be good at what you do and so on? Um, I think it's just society needs to know that people can have upsides, people can have skills, people can have things to offer to the world that are good, whether they're blind or sighted, autistic, realistic, multiple or not. And then, of course, there's good people, there's bad people, there's people in between of all of those things. But none of those labels make somebody a bad person. None of those labels make somebody incompetent. You're just going to find the range of competence, incompetence, kindness, meanness, and so on among people of all identities. That's just humanity. Don't pin it on those labels like if you're autistic, you don't have empathy. I have tremendous amounts of empathy. I have so much empathy, it hurts. I walk in a room and I feel everybody's feelings. Like, don't make these assumptions about someone just because we're blind that we can't have a love life, or just because we're autistic we don't have empathy, or just because we're multiple that we're violent or whatever. Come to know us as individuals and then base your judgments of us on how we actually behave in the moment. If I'm showing you kindness, respond to that. If I'm being mean, respond to that. But respond to me being mean because I was mean, not because I'm autistic or something. Just go by people's actual actions and behaviors, not by what you assume they're going to be because of some label that they have.
Yeah, thank you very much. Do you want to add something, to say something in the end or not?
I think that pretty much covered everything. I appreciate you interviewing us. I hope
Thank
it
you
was
very much. Thank you.
helpful and informative.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry that I interrupt you.
Oh, it's okay. And I'm sorry. I know the connection made it really hard to
Yeah.
have a flow because we had to keep asking to repeat and everything.
Yeah. It's okay.
Okay, cool. Thank you again.
Thank you.
to all
Thank
of
you. Bye.
All right, bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Yeah, so thank you for watching us. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. It would be more interview with different marginalized people and many interview about our own system. Yes. Bye.